At 83, Harrison Ford has reached an age where silence becomes a choice, not a necessity. After more than 6 decades in Hollywood, a lifetime of iconic roles, and a career that shaped modern cinema, Ford no longer feels the need to soften his words or hide behind polite ambiguity. When Harrison Ford speaks now, he speaks slowly, carefully, not to impress, not to perform, but to tell the truth. And for the first time, that truth carries a name he had long kept unspoken in public reflections: Helen Mirren. This was not a dramatic confession, no headline-seeking declaration, no manufactured Hollywood moment. Instead, it came quietly in the way only Harrison Ford ever does: measured, blunt, undeniably sincere. Born on July 13, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, Ford's life began far from red carpets and flashing cameras. His father, Christopher Ford, worked as an advertising executive and had once been an actor. His mother, Dorothy, was a former radio actress. Yet despite this early proximity to performance, Ford was never drawn to attention. As a young man, he was shy, introspective, more interested in independence than applause, more comfortable working with his hands than standing in the spotlight. Those early years forged the grounded, no-nonsense man audiences would later recognize on screen. A man who never chased celebrity, even when it chased him. Ford attended Ripon College in Wisconsin, originally studying philosophy. Ironically, the drama class that would change his life was never taken out of ambition. He enrolled simply to overcome his shyness. What began as self-improvement quietly planted the seed for a future that would redefine cinema. When he moved to Los Angeles in the mid-1960s, signing a contract with Columbia Pictures, reality hit hard. Roles were scarce, rejection was constant. He was dismissed, overlooked, and repeatedly told he didn't fit the mold. Eventually, disillusioned, Ford stepped away from acting altogether. He became a carpenter. That choice was not a failure. It was survival. It grounded him, supported his family, and built a resilience that would later define every role he played. Years later, fate intervened when that same carpentry work brought him back into the orbit of Hollywood, reconnecting him with George Lucas. A small role in American Graffiti hinted at something more, but no one could have predicted what would come next. In 1977, Harrison Ford became Han Solo, and the world changed. Yet even as a stardom arrived overnight, Ford never allowed himself to be consumed by it. He refused to become a product of success. He continued choosing roles that reflected complexity, vulnerability, and moral weight. As Indiana Jones, as Rick Deckard, as men defined not by ego, but by responsibility. And now, decades later, standing firmly in the final chapter of his career, Harrison Ford speaks not as a legend protecting his image, but as a man reflecting on truth, integrity, and greatness. It is from this place that he finally speaks about Helen Mirren, not with exaggeration, not with nostalgia, but with rare clarity. And what he reveals says as much about him as it does about her. Long before the world knew his face, Harrison Ford learned what it meant to endure. After the unexpected explosion of Star Wars in 1977, he could have taken the easy path. He could have repeated the same role, the same swagger, the same charm that audiences adored. Many actors would have, but Ford never chased comfort. Instead, he chose risk. With Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981, he introduced the world to Indiana Jones, a hero unlike any before him, intelligent yet vulnerable, brave yet flawed, a man who bled, doubted, and laughed at danger rather than standing above it. The role didn't just redefine the adventure genre, it cemented Ford as a rare kind of star, one whose strength came from humanity, not invincibility. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Ford dominated Hollywood in a way few actors ever have. yet his choices remained deliberate. In Witness, 1985, he has stripped away charisma to reveal quiet moral conflict, earning an Academy Award nomination. In The Mosquito Coast, 1986, he portrayed obsession and psychological unraveling, showing audiences a darker side of his talent. Then came Blade Runner. As Rick Deckard, Ford explored identity, memory, and the fragile boundary between human and machine. At the time, the film divided critics. Years later, it would become one of the most influential science fiction films in history, with Ford's restrained, introspective performance at its emotional core. Beyond science fiction and adventure, Ford became synonymous with principled authority figures. In films like Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, and Air Force One, he embodied men who acted not out of ego, but duty, characters defined by responsibility rather than dominance. Audiences trusted him, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. Despite extraordinary fame, Ford resisted celebrity culture. He remained fiercely private, preferring a life centered on family, craftsmanship, and personal passions. Aviation became one of those passions. As an accomplished pilot, flying offered him freedom, control, and solitude. A reminder that independence mattered more than applause. He also committed himself deeply to environmental causes, serving as vice chair of Conservation International, using his influence not for image, but impact. As the years passed, Ford did something few stars manage with grace. He aged honestly, returning to iconic roles in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Star Wars The Force Awakens, and Blade Runner 2049. He allowed his characters to reflect time, loss, and experience. These were no longer heroes frozen in youth. They were men shaped by life, and that philosophy, the refusal to deny complexity, would later shape how we spoke about another actor who had done the same, someone who never disappeared with age, someone who expanded, someone whose integrity mirrored his own. That is when Helen Mirren enters the story, not as a headline, but as a reflection. To understand why Harrison Ford's words about Helen Mirren carry such weight, you have to understand what matters most to him when the cameras stop rolling, because Ford's life away from the screen has always been a quiet contrast to the storm of fame around him. At the center of that private world was family. Ford became a father for the first time during his marriage to Mary Marquardt, his college sweetheart and first wife. Their relationship began long before he was famous, before the world ever knew his name, back when he was still fighting for acting jobs and working any way he could just to keep life stable. During those years, he wasn't living like a movie star. He was building furniture, taking carpentry work, trying to hold his family together while chasing a dream that gave him almost nothing back. From that first marriage came his first two sons, Benjamin and Willard. Both grew up largely outside the Hollywood spotlight, shaped by a father who never wanted his children to feel like they were living inside a famous man's shadow. Benjamin Ford chose a completely different life. He became a chef and restaurateur, earning respect on his own merits rather than borrowing from his father's legacy. Willard Ford pursued business ventures, following his own interests far removed from acting. Ford has often spoken about something that almost sounds like a personal mission. Let your children discover who they are. Don't force them to live your story. Let them write their own. Later, Ford entered a second marriage, this time with acclaimed screenwriter Melissa Mathison, best known for writing E.T., the Extraterrestrial. Their connection wasn't just romantic, it was creative, intellectual, and deeply emotional. Together, they created a home that blended storytelling, imagination, and family life. From that marriage came two more children, Malcolm and Georgia. Malcolm grew up immersed in creativity, becoming both a musician and an actor, choosing work that reflected personal artistry rather than mainstream fame. Georgia Ford followed a path closer to her father's profession, establishing herself as an actress while also speaking openly about her own challenges and resilience. And through it all, Ford's reputation as a father became clear to those who knew him: supportive, but not controlling; present, but not intrusive; proud, but never possessive. In later life, Ford found endearing companionship with actress Callista Flockhart, whom he married in 2010. Their relationship brought stability and contentment, with both balancing careers while prioritizing family. Together, they adopted a son, Liam, and Ford embraced fatherhood again with the same seriousness he always carried. Because to Ford, parenting was never a chapter that ends. It was a responsibility that lasts for life. Today, he is also a proud grandfather with 3 grandchildren, a role that quietly reshaped his sense of legacy. People close to him have noted that becoming a grandfather brought him deeper joy and perspective, reinforcing what he always believed. Box office fades. Awards gather dust. But family remains. Across decades of marriages, career highs, and personal reinvention, Ford's identity as a father and family man stayed constant. The world may see Han Solo, Indiana Jones, and legendary heroes, but those closest to him see something else: a man who measures success not in fame, but in the lives he protected from fame. And when a man like that finally speaks openly about another person, you know it isn't performance, it's truth. Now, we arrive at the moment where Ford finally says what he really thinks about Helen Mirren. At 83, Harrison Ford no longer speaks to be remembered. He speaks because he no longer needs to protect anything. After more than 6 decades in the industry, he has watched trends rise and fall, careers explode and disappear, legends burn bright and fade. He has nothing left to prove, and that is precisely why his words now carry such authority. It is in this reflective stage of his life that Ford finally spoke candidly about Helen Mirren. And when he did, there was a noticeable shift. Ford has never been known for exaggerated praise. He avoids grand speeches. He distrusts performance off-screen as much as he values truth on it. His reputation has always been built on blunt honesty, sometimes to the point of discomfort. But when Helen Mirren's name came up, his tone changed. "Helen is the real thing," he said. "No ornament, no drama, just truth." He explained that with her, there's no pretense. What you see is exactly who she is. In an industry built on illusion, that kind of authenticity is rare. And coming from a man as guarded and private as Ford, those words carried enormous weight. What Ford seems to admire most is her fearlessness, not just as an actress, but as a woman navigating Hollywood entirely on her own terms. "She never chased approval," he once remarked. "She chased the work. And because of that, the approval followed." Those words weren't accidental. They were recognition. Ford saw in Mirren a kindred spirit, someone who refused to be boxed in by expectations, trends, or age. Someone who built a career defined not by momentary fame, but by longevity, discipline, and self-respect. He has also spoken about her intelligence, and not in the casual way people often use the word. "She's sharp," Ford said, "deeply intelligent about human behavior, about history, about storytelling." To him, Mirren approaches acting almost like a scholarship. Every role is a study, every performance grounded in understanding, not ego. Whether she portrays royalty, a detective, or an ordinary woman facing extraordinary circumstances, she brings the same seriousness of purpose. She respects the audience, Ford explained. She doesn't take shortcuts, and she doesn't assume people are stupid. That statement reveals more than admiration. It reveals alignment, because Ford built his own legacy on the same belief that audiences deserve honesty, that the stories matter, that truth, even when quiet, lasts longer than the spectacle. But there was one truth Ford saved for later, one observation that felt deeply personal, something about age and what it really means to endure. For Harrison Ford, the conversation about Helen Mirren wasn't just about talent, it was about time, because Hollywood has always been ruthless about aging. It celebrates youth, then punishes the natural act of growing older. It makes people feel like they must shrink, disappear, and quietly step aside. But Helen Mirren did the opposite, and Ford noticed. One of the most striking truths he acknowledged is how Mirren redefined what it means to age in an industry obsessed with youth. She didn't fade into the background. She didn't retreat into a silence. She didn't accept the invisible rules Hollywood tries to enforce. Helen didn't disappear, Ford said. She expanded. And then came the line that felt like more than an observation. It felt like a confession. She showed that getting older doesn't mean getting smaller. For Ford, those words weren't only about Mirren. They were about himself too. Because Ford has also continued working into his 80s. He has kept returning to the screen not to chase nostalgia, but to stay engaged, creative, present, alive. His later performances have carried maturity and emotional weight, proving that the storytelling should reflect life's complexity instead of denying it. In Mirren, Ford saw proof that longevity can still be powerful, that the strength can evolve rather than vanish, that relevance is not something you beg for, it's something you earn through craft. He also spoke about her authenticity off-screen, something he values deeply. There's no artifice with her, he noted. She doesn't pretend to be something she's not, and she doesn't apologize for who she is. In a world where celebrity images are carefully manufactured, Ford found Mirren's honesty refreshing. She carries confidence that doesn't come from ego, but from self-knowledge earned over time. And perhaps the most revealing truth Ford shared, the one that sounded almost sacred coming from him, was what he believed she represents. Mirren, in his eyes, is the best version of what acting can be. She reminds you why this work matters, he said. Then came the highest compliment Harrison Ford could ever offer anyone. When you watch her, you're not watching someone perform. You're watching someone tell the truth. For an actor whose entire legacy is built on grounded human performances, that wasn't just praise, that was respect at the deepest level. In finally speaking about Helen Mirren this way, Ford wasn't trying to create a headline. He was revealing what he believes survives when everything else fades: integrity, discipline, authenticity, and the quiet power of truth. Now all that remains is the final reflection, the closing message, what it all means and why these words matter now more than ever. At 83, Harrison Ford has reached a place few ever do, a place beyond ambition, beyond fear, beyond the need to explain himself. When he speaks about Helen Mirren now, his words are not dressed in nostalgia or inflated tribute. They are measured, honest, carefully chosen, spoken by a man who understands greatness not as an idea, but as something he has lived alongside for decades. In finally telling the truth about Helen Mirren, Ford reveals something deeper than admiration for a fellow legend. He reveals his own values, sharpened by time and stripped of illusion. He respects integrity because he built his life around it. He honors discipline because it carried him through obscurity. He believes in authenticity because it is the only thing that endures when fame fades. Ford has watched Hollywood reward noise and forget substance. He has seen talent rise quickly and disappear just as fast. But he has also seen what lasts: careers built on truth, artists who respect the work, people who refuse to shrink with age. Helen Mirren, in his eyes, represents that rare combination: craft without vanity, confidence without performance, power without aggression. She didn't chase approval. She earned it by staying honest even when honesty was inconvenient. And perhaps that is why Ford waited until now to speak. Because at 83, he no longer needs to impress anyone. He no longer needs to protect an image. He no longer needs to soften the truth. He speaks as a man who has lived fully, failed openly, endured quietly, and succeeded without losing himself. While the world will always remember Harrison Ford as Han Solo, Indiana Jones, and countless other iconic figures, those roles were never the point. They were vehicles. What mattered was the man inside them. And when that man finally speaks about another artist with this level of clarity, it becomes something more than commentary. It becomes a testament to what matters, to what lasts, to why storytelling still has power when it is rooted in truth. At 83, Harrison Ford doesn't tell stories to entertain anymore. He tells them to honor something real. And in telling the truth about Helen Mirren, he reminds us of the quiet standard both of them lived by all along. When you strip everything away, truth is the only legacy that survives,